All of the footage you just saw was shot by Jake and Landon on the all-new Sony ZV-1, a brand new compact camera aimed at the beginner filmmaker, vlogger, YouTuber, or just everyday home videoer. Now, you all know that I'm a diehard Canon user. I do own Sony cameras, but I prefer Canon because I think they're easier to use, have better colors, better autofocus. However, unlike many camera owners, I'm not closed off to the idea of using other brands of cameras. I'm willing to use any camera that I think's better than another camera. So when I heard about some of the features that are packed into this new Sony camera, I wanted to be one of the first ones to test it out and see if it could replace some of my other cameras. So in this video, I'm going to be comparing this to cameras that I currently own that I think this could potentially replace, which specifically is my iPhone 11 and something like a Canon M50. So I'm going to be doing some test footage to show you the pros and cons of each of these. And no, this video is not sponsored by Sony. I'm not even necessarily a Sony fan, but I do think this camera has the potential to fill a gap in the camera industry, and that gap is this. My main camera I use professionally is the 1DX Mark II, but the camera that I use most is the iPhone 11 because most of my life is spent with my family and it's not very practical or safe to lug around a big camera to capture everyday moments, so most of the footage or videos that I capture these days are on my iPhone. However, iPhone quality really doesn't compare to my other cameras, so it's sad for me as a professional to not have a tool that is both convenient to carry around and also has professional quality. And there are cameras on the market right now trying to bridge this gap, like the Osmo Pocket or GoPros, but in my opinion, these types of cameras aren't much better than my iPhone in quality and control, so it wouldn't be worth it for me to carry around a whole separate camera. So I'm actually pretty intrigued by this camera as I think it has the potential to perfectly fill that gap. So let's take a look at the specs, show you some footage, and compare it to similar cameras to see what I like and don't like about it. First off, the introductory price is set at $749, so about twice as much as an Osmo or a GoPro, and about $200 more than a beginner camera kit like a Canon M50, which is what I currently recommend to beginning filmmakers and vloggers. So the question is, does this camera have enough extra features that makes it worth the extra money? First, let's take a look at resolution and frame rates. The ZV-1 can shoot 4K at up to 30 frames per second and 1080p at up to 120 frames per second. And it goes up to 960 frames per second at 420p in 2-second bursts. Now the 420p isn't very usable professionally, but it is still kind of cool to have that as an option. And we'll put some samples on screen so you can see what that slow motion looks like. As for the sensor size, the ZV-1 sports a 1-inch sensor, which is going to be about 2 times bigger than an iPhone or Osmo or GoPro. However, it is about half the size of the Canon M50, which is an APS-C sensor. Keep in mind though that the M50, when shooting in 4K, crops in even more, making it about the same size as a 1-inch sensor. But let's now talk about the lens. It comes with a Zeiss 24 to 70mm equivalent lens that stops down to a 1.8 aperture at 24mm and 2.8 aperture at 70mm. But this lens is not interchangeable, so it's the only lens you get with this camera. There are pros and cons to this. The pro being that it's much more compact of a lens and retracts into itself, so it's much less bulky for traveling, so it could actually fit in your pocket versus an M50 definitely couldn't. The con being, of course, that if you want a wider angle lens or a tighter lens, there's nothing you can do about it. So I would have liked to have seen the zoom range be a little bit wider since it's the only lens, but it does go from a 1.8 to a 2.8 aperture compared to most kit lenses that come with a beginner camera, usually go from a 3.5 to a 5.6 aperture, like my M50 kit lens. So the ZV-1 lens will do a lot better in low light compared to most kit lenses, and will also give you a lot more background blur. Also, comparing it to an iPhone or Osmo or GoPro, the optical quality of the glass is going to be a lot nicer and do a better job in situations like when you're putting your subject in front of a bright light, so this lens is definitely going to be nicer than most beginner options. Next, let's talk about autofocus. This is a big one for beginners, vloggers, and home videoers, and I think Canon usually has the best autofocus technology with their dual pixel autofocus, but Sony is claiming they are just as good if not better, and they've included in this entry-level camera real-time eye autofocus that worked pretty flawlessly every time I used it. In fact, comparing it to the M50's face tracking, I thought the ZV-1 had a lot more reliable autofocus. So for these two cameras specifically, Sony does actually have better autofocus. Another cool feature is that this camera has product showcase settings, which means when you're going from eye track focus to putting something in front of the screen, the camera usually doesn't pick up the product because it's focusing on my face, so you have to put it in front of your face in order for it to pick it up, and then it's kind of hard to get it to go back and forth between the two. But with the Sony camera, with just a push of a button, you can switch the focus mode to look for the product and switch back and forth. Just make sure you turn this off when you only want it to focus on your face, otherwise it's going to be constantly grabbing whatever's in the foreground. As for image stabilization, it has a combination of both optical and electronic stabilization that results in a very smooth handheld shot while walking or holding on a bumpy car ride, but it's not ideal while you're running, so I definitely get a stabilizer if you're going to be doing running shots. But for everything else, it does do a great job. Not quite as good as the iPhone in my opinion, but definitely better than an M50, which doesn't have any stabilization at all. As for low light performance, it's going to do a lot better than your smartphone or your GoPro, and it's even quite a bit better than the M50 because of both the higher ISO capabilities and the better kit lens. But let's talk next about colors. This is something I've always talked about that Canon does the best, is their in-camera colors and their skin tones and just overall color science. But Sony claims to have re-engineered their color science in this camera to optimize for skin tones, and I have to say, after having used it for a few days, I can tell that they've improved it, so it's great to see them continually improving on previously weak points. Now, one thing this camera is very focused on is audio quality. This is one of the biggest issues with beginner cameras like iPhones or GoPros or even most DSLRs, is that the internal microphones on the camera itself is usually really bad and requires an external microphone in order to have any kind of audio that's decent. But on this camera in particular, Sony built it for vloggers and YouTubers in mind, and so they put a 3-capsule directional mic, allowing for a lot crisper audio for anything in front of the camera while minimizing background noise. They also give you a little dead cat that you can put on top to cut down on wind noise. And here's a quick comparison showing the difference in audio quality compared to the iPhone. All right, check 1, 2. This is the audio that we're going to begin. Audio quality. Check 1, 2, 3. This is the audio quality on the iPhone. So as you can hear, quite an improvement in audio quality. And another cool feature that is unique to this camera is that the hot shoe is actually a multi-interface shoe, meaning that you can use a number of Sony supported mics and capture audio from an external microphone with no cables. The shoe provides the power and audio connection. Moving on now to what's probably the biggest new feature for a Sony camera is the fact that this has a side flip out screen. This is the first Sony camera to sport one of these. They've had the top flipping screens in the past, but if you mount anything on top of the camera, then it's not very usable. So this is definitely a big selling point and another feature that I've always liked better about Canon that Sony now has matched. However, it's only touchscreen for focusing and not for changing settings like the Canon M50. So that was a bummer that I couldn't change camera settings on the screen. And a con for both the Canon M50 and the Sony is that when shooting in direct sunlight, the screen is really hard to see. My iPhone is a lot bigger and a lot brighter, so the iPhone wins over both of these in screen quality. Another thing I wasn't stoked about is the battery life. Because it's a tiny camera, it has a tiny battery and it doesn't come with a battery charger, so you're forced to plug in the whole camera. And in our tests, the camera only lasts about an hour and a half to 2 hours when shooting the entire time. So we do recommend buying a separate battery charger and extra batteries so you can swap out batteries throughout the day and change the dead ones while you're filming. A few other things worth mentioning: it does have wireless file transferring through their mobile app that allows you to quickly transfer files from your camera to your phone, but that's probably one of the biggest pros of a smartphone is you can quickly post straight to social media without any file transferring, so that's still a pro for smartphones. And the last thing I want to mention was the accessory they made to accompany this camera called the Easy to Hold Grip. That does sell separately, but I'd say is a must for vloggers, and it's actually designed really well, screws in the bottom of the camera, and allows for easy tilt and lock with the side button, and doubles as both a hand grip for vlogging or normal filming and as a tripod. And it connects via Bluetooth to the camera, allowing you to push record, take a photo, zoom the lens in and out, and because it's Bluetooth, even if you take it off, it acts as a remote, so you can record and do all those things as long as you're holding the grip. So overall, pretty slick setup. I've previously laughed at the idea of a compact camera that doesn't have interchangeable lenses, but for the right demographic, this thing could be a perfect choice as it's jam-packed with features in a super small, light body. As you can see from my test, there are pros and cons to choosing this over some cheaper options, but it just depends on which features are most important to you and the types of videos you shoot. So would I personally recommend this, and for who? Yes, I would. I think it's a great fit for vloggers. I can't think of another camera on the market in this size at this price point that would be better for vlogging. I mean, it weighs 0.6 pounds, both body and lens, and with the grip, maybe a pound. So you could definitely hold this all day long, no problem. And though there are nicer quality cameras out there for vlogging, your setup is gonna be a lot heavier and a lot bulkier. And though there's cheaper options out there, like the Osmo or GoPro or iPhone, they just aren't going to compare in video quality. I would also recommend this to beginning filmmakers. However, because of the non-interchangeable lens and the smaller sensor size, I still think something like an M50 might be a better option. Just pros and cons, but not being able to interchange the lenses would be the biggest con to using this as a filmmaking camera. For For YouTubers, TikTokers, webcammers, home videoers, I think this is a great option as well. I don't think it's quite compact enough and convenient enough to replace my iPhone. There's just something so quick and convenient about using your iPhone. It's always already with you, fits slim in your pocket, can also make phone calls and connect to apps. So in that regard, I don't think any camera can replace the practicality of a smartphone completely unless cameras start taking on the qualities of phones. But there you have it, guys. Those are my thoughts on the Sony ZV-1. Definitely worth checking out if you're looking for a camera in this budget. Links are in the description if you'd like to learn more. Hopefully this review was helpful. I always say though that buying the right gear isn't nearly as important as learning how to actually use it. And we've built our online course, Full-Time Filmmaker, to teach you everything you need to know about making professional looking videos. And we have a free 1-hour training that reveals our top 10 secrets to improving your videos that you can check out by clicking over here. But that's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you have any further questions, please let me know.